All right. Well, welcome. And for those of you in the Eastern time zone and East, good afternoon. My name is b.well, and I am a member of the HL7 CodeX Program Management Office, and I'm here to host our bi-monthly Community of Practice event. So thank you for registering. Thank you for attending. I think we've got a great program in store for you over the next 57 minutes, and I'm looking forward to hearing from our presenters. Before we get to our eminent presenters, I'll just give a couple minutes background on HL7 CodeX for those of you who might be less familiar. And so here we go. An intro to CodeX. So first off, HL7 CodeX is a not-for-profit group of members. We operate under the umbrella of the HL7 Standards Organization. And our focus is on breaking down healthcare data silos and with a real focus on clinical subspecialties. And so to do that, we convene a open and transparent and multidisciplinary community where folks come together to identify clinical problems and then co-develop solutions to those problems. In general, our solutions are published as HL7 FHIR implementation guides, and they are built to be tested in the real world, and they're built to be scalable. We are not the only accelerator. We are one of 8 accelerators under the HL7 umbrella, and each of our sibling accelerators focuses on a specific area of healthcare. So for instance, our friends at Gravity focus on social determinants of health, and our friends at Vulcan focus on research. Our focus is, again, on clinical subspecialties. Within CodeX, there are 3 groupings or domains that we focus in. We started in the oncology domain, with MCode being our foundation. And then a couple of years ago, we expanded into the cardiovascular health and genomics domains, and we have cute marketing names for each of those groups, CardX and GenomeX. Those are just groups within CodeX. It's important, of course, when we're talking about the community that we assemble, to point to the community that we assemble. And in fact, these are our members. We're very proud of the number of members that we have. We're also proud of the diversity of members, and we're proud of the engagement that each of our members brings and the investment to developing solutions together. And so if you haven't already done so, here's an invitation, a call to action, as it were. First off, we encourage you to continue to attend these community of practice events. If you find today's event useful, feel free to share the recording link with your colleagues, and to encourage folks in your sphere of influence to attend future community of practice events. They happen every 2 months. Our next one will be in October. Second layer of engagement, reach out to me. I'm the Membership Engagement Manager here at CodeX, and so I'm your first point of contact if you'd like to learn more about a use case, if you'd like to find out how you can participate and what's happening, then just reach out to me and I'll be happy to connect you to the resources that you need. Next, we have a number of projects, we call them use cases, that are in what we call the ideation or discovery phase. These are the early stages of these projects, and at this stage, they are open to members of the public. Here is a subset of those use cases that are in discovery phase that are open to the public. It's a great opportunity to hear how we imagine these things going, and how you can learn about how you can contribute as an individual or as a team. And finally, if you find all of this very engaging and exciting, then you can join as an HL7 CodeX member, and then we will add you to our beautiful slide of logos, and that will be good for all of us. Anyways, that's my lightning quick overview of HL7 CodeX. We're glad that you're here. We're even more glad to welcome our presenters, and because I rebooted, my notes aren't up. I just would like to introduce them with their proper names, and to do that, I should probably have those in front of me, and I don't want to mispronounce or miss anybody. So here we go. Notes are loading. So we're going to be talking today about clinical trial matching. This is a really important area of work in the technology and healthcare space, getting folks who have cancer and connecting them with folks who have novel therapies for cancer. It's important for those therapies to gain validation. It's also important for those patients to have hope when first-line therapies may not be meeting their needs. And so to that end, we actually have two sets of presenters. Our first presenter is Sharon Shriver, who is with the American Cancer Society Cancer Action Network. And she and her team were really involved in the clinical trial matching use case project that we ran at CodeX for a couple of years. And so she'll give sort of a retrospective view of what CodeX is doing in clinical trial matching. And then we have three colleagues from b.well, Humza, Adam, and Laurel. And I hope that you guys will introduce yourself more fully when you get the mic. And they're going to be talking about what b.well is doing and how they're extending things in the direction they're hoping to take things. My hope, and that of the CodeX PMO, is that this will engender some discussion as a community, and that folks will say, hey, you know, this is a project that we can see ourselves getting behind, and we'd like to find a way to participate in this. So it's exciting to learn about this stuff, but it's also tied to an implied or now explicit call to action, which is think about how you as an individual or an organization can participate or contribute to advancing the efforts of CodeX and ACS can and what b.well will be presenting. So I'm excited to hear more. I'm excited about the conversations that will flow from it. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing. And I'm going to invite Sharon to share her screen and her deck. And then Sharon can introduce herself better than I did. And you guys can listen to somebody else for a while. I can see your slides.
Thank you, b.well. Hi, everybody. Nice to see you all. I thought that was a great introduction. I'm Sharon Shriver. I'm a scientist by training, and I'm a senior policy analyst with ACS CAN. And just by way of continuing the lightning quick background, ACS CAN is the American Cancer Society's nonprofit, nonpartisan advocacy affiliate. And we work to create evidence-based public policy change, enact legislative and regulatory solutions that will reduce the cancer burden. So I work with the policy team. We assess, we assemble the evidence that steers and supports all of our policy efforts. In some cases, we do some discovery on our own, which is what this particular project is, but mainly we're focused on policy efforts. So I'm going to tell you a little bit today about the work we've been doing on the Blue Button project. As b.well said, and I'm sure as you all know, clinical trials are key to discovery of effective cancer treatments, but only about 20 to 30% of clinical trials, 20 to 30% of clinical trials fail due to low enrollment. And we know that only about 7% of cancer patients actually enroll in trials. So to start to dig into some potential strategies in this space, ACS CAN convened a large group of stakeholders back in 2018 to create a landscape report looking at what some of these barriers are to clinical trial enrollment. And this is available online to read. It's a really rich document. I'll keep coming back to this, to the things we found, but basically the recommendations that came out of this barriers report were what led to the Blue Button project, in addition to other initiatives as well. So we know that clinical trial participation is a multi-step process. Very simply, are there trials available? Is the patient screened for those trials? Is the patient eligible? Are they invited to enroll? And do they consent? And I think these steps are not always really well articulated, even though they're kind of obvious. We tend to focus on opening trials and getting patients to consent and sort of forget about all the steps in the middle. Understanding these different steps and where the barriers are, where the hangups are occurring, is really key to determining what policy strategies might improve trial participation. So that's where we're going with all of this. What we know is that 85% of patients are not actually offered a clinical trial. So either there's no trial available for those patients at the site where they're being seen, or there might be a trial, but they're simply not asked whether they'd like to enroll in a trial. When patients are offered a chance to enroll in the trial, more than half of them will agree to enroll if they're offered the trial. And there's no difference among racial and ethnic subgroups in that agreement to enroll, which kind of blows up one sort of historic thinking about why people might not enroll in trials. Ironically, we spend a lot of time trying to think of how to convince patients to enroll in trials, but in fact, most of them would agree to enroll in trials. So this problem with a trial not being eligible or not being available where a patient is eligible is something we started to look at in this little study looking at sites within the Atlanta region. So we took 20 synthetic breast cancer patients and searched for clinical trials in a 20-mile radius in the Atlanta region. And we found 38 unique trials that were returned for all of those patients. These trials were spread out across a number of sites within Atlanta. And what was really interesting is that 24 of the trials are found at Emory, which is the cancer center located there. And only 5 of the trials were found at Grady, which is the safety net hospital in town. So even though there's an average of 11 trials at each site and there's 38 trials per patient relevant, depending on where that patient walks in the door, changes whether they're going to be likely to be offered a trial or not. This data was confirmed in a more recent study where they took Commission on Cancer accredited sites, 1,200 sites, and looked at the percentage of patients enrolling in clinical trials and found that trial enrollment is 5 times higher, not surprisingly, at NCI designated cancer centers than at community sites, community cancer programs. This, however, is really significant when you think about where the patients are, because 75% of cancer patients are actually being seen at these community cancer sites as compared to the cancer centers where only 15% of patients are seen. So that kind of leads me, that's a little bit of background about, why we're sort of motivated to do this work. So in thinking about where to go with all of this, what aspects of these of the process can be targeted to increase trial offers to patients. We did a survey of providers. I don't have a slide for this. We did a survey of providers and found that the number one concerns for providers were that a trial search needs to be automated. Most of them were not searching for trials. They either weren't aware of trials, even at their own institutions, certainly not aware of trials located within their region. And they didn't have time to look for the trials. Even if they knew about ct.gov, they simply didn't have time to search. And so, they wanted an easy way to identify trials and something that was seamlessly located within their typical workflow. So that sort of all together led to this idea of this blue button trial matching regional search. So in the sort of typical model, the way things usually go, a patient will go to a practice site, they'll go to see their doctor. Pre-screening for trials may or may not happen. There may or may not be trials on site, and they may or may not be offered any trials. The idea that we had was that we would take this patient's data and add this regional search functionality using existing trial matching apps. So we're not trying to create a new service. We're not supplanting ct.gov. We're not actually even going directly to ct.gov. We just want to use these existing clinical trial matching services in a seamless way that would then return possible trials within the region back to the provider to discuss with the patient. So in order to sort of proceed with this model to see if it would work, we had some questions we needed to answer first. So, can we pull enough data out of the EHR? This is where ENCODE and CodeX come in. Can we pull these data elements out of the EHR to do a reasonable search for trials? Would 8 data elements, which is what our team of stakeholders kind of decided were the core elements, would these 8 data elements be sufficient to give a good quality pre-screen for clinical trials? Would we find more trials regionally than we did at individual institutions, kind of following up on that Georgia study? And are there limitations where this might work? So, so we asked all these questions. I'm just going to quickly walk through what we found for these before we sort of moved into the live trial that we have now. So with feasibility testing, can we get the data? You know, here we used archival patient data and a large medical records database to search. And just to jump to the bottom line here, what we found were only 2 of these elements. We're looking at these 8 elements: age, cancer type, metastasis stage. Only 2 of these were reliably found in the electronic health record: age and cancer type. The rest were found at varying degrees of reliability or readability within the record. So, so the answer is kind of yes, we can get the data sometimes, and sometimes we can get more, and sometimes less. Then we wanted to know if those 8 data elements, if we were searching for clinical trials, would we get likely matches for patients? And so we took an 84 patient cohort. These are archival patient records again. And we searched for provisional matches within a 100-mile radius of the Dallas area zip code. We were partnering with UT Southwestern in this work. We searched within the region, got likely matches back based on those 8 optimized patient data elements. And then we had a clinical nurse review the trials that came back with that search and compare those with the full patient record to see if they were actually a pretty good match for the patient. That review took about 5 minutes per each trial with a range. The longest was, 30 minutes to longer, and some were very, very quick to eliminate. And what we found was, so the blue bars are what came back initially from our search, and the green bars are what the nurse decided were actually pretty good matches. And we found overall that about half of the trials were good matches for patients. So at about 5 minutes per trial search, that means for 10 minutes of time, there's a pretty good chance that a matching trial would be found based on this kind of search. We wanted to know if this regional searching actually made a difference. And again, jumping to the bottom line here, we took our 84 patients in the Dallas region. 40% of those had a trial at UTSW. This is a major cancer center, so they have a lot of trials located on site. But we found that by looking regionally within the Dallas area, we could increase the number of patients that had trials up to about 75%. So almost doubling the number of patients that had trials available just by looking at other sites. That increase is going to be more significant depending on where the patient starts out. So I can't remember what site A and site B were. These are other cancer care, cancer research sites within the Dallas area. But if somebody went to site B, then they had a much lower likelihood of finding a trial there, which would more significantly increase by looking within the region. So the answer to this question was yes. Regional searching did, in fact, have a significant effect. The last question was whether this would work everywhere, and the answer is probably not. Not too surprisingly, actually. So we took a subset of these 84 patients. This was actually 21 patients now, and we dropped them in different zip codes around the country, targeting different areas of population density. So starting on the right, if we looked at urban areas, most patients, almost 90% of patients, would have a trial that was a good match for them within a 20-mile radius. And by increasing the search to 100 miles, pretty much almost everybody had a trial. But if you look in the more rural areas, the lessly populated areas, even searching in 100 miles doesn't give you as good trial return as we see in more urban areas. So So the answer to that question is no, it's not going to work everywhere. But I want to come back to that at the end, because I think this model might actually have a reasonable solution to this problem. So these are just the same questions again. The answer was yes, probably, definitely, and probably not to these questions. So then we proceeded. Well, first we published all of this, and there's a link in the slides to this paper. This paper was actually published along with, in a trilogy of papers, along with a summary of the large stakeholder working group we made and the provider survey that I told you about. So if you want more information, those papers are all together. So based on all of this, we proceeded to develop the tool we call the Blue Button tool, which is an app developed by the MITRE Corporation in collaboration with us and with CodeX. This app, this is fairly complicated. I'm not going to walk through all of it, but basically this is a piece of software that sits within the health system IT infrastructure. It is not in the EHR. It never writes to the EHR. This is something sites are very concerned about. But it sits within the health system safety net, pulls the data from the patient record on demand when the button is pushed, one by one. It's an individual manual push, so we're not automatically doing anything in the EHR. Pulls those 8 data elements out, sends that de-identified information, only those 8 data elements, out to our partner matching services who work with us. They send back the results. Those results are screened through clinicaltrials.gov to get full information and return back to the app, again, which is within the hospital infrastructure. The clinical coordinator can then go to the app, grab that data that came back, and then add that to the patient record and review it and add it to the patient record for discussion when they meet with their provider. This is what it looks like. So this is a screenshot of the Blue Button tool. It's a little bit hard to read, but you'll have the slides later. Basically, when the coordinator is in the patient record, they open Blue Button. They see this screen. The 8 data elements are automatically populated if they were found. So whatever elements were found are here. The search will work with as few or as many elements as are pulled, and the coordinator has the option at this stage to add additional information or modify whatever information is there. The app can also be set for the source zip code and the regional search radius. And this is where I wanted to come back to say, while in some rural areas, there may not be trials within the region, by setting the zip code, let's say somebody lives in Montana somewhere where there's just nothing within 100 miles, but they have a sister living in Chicago. They could put the Chicago zip code in and a radius around that zip code to find trials where they might be able to go to stay with their sister and have treatment that way. So it's quite flexible like that. The coordinator then pushes the blue button. Get it? It's a blue button. And then what they see is this comes back in seconds, is the list of trials that came that the trial matching services returned and have been screened against ct.gov. And then the coordinator can go through, as we did in our feasibility study, compare these with the full patient records, narrow down the list, and then that narrowed down list can be exported and then uploaded to REDCap or whatever their patient record management system is for review. So we're testing this out right now. We have a pilot study that we've launched. It's a clinical trial, studying clinical trials. We launched in 2023. We have a goal of 1,200 patients split into 2 arms, a control arm, and then those receiving the blue button screening. We are registered with ct.gov, and we're going to look at overall enrollment, patient demographics, any patient barriers that come up. We're trying to provide patient support for enrollment, so we're looking at that last step as well. And we're doing the study at 2 different locations. So University of Texas Southwestern is the cancer center there. They've been working with us all along in the project. It's sort of in an urban area, lots of trials located there. We're also working with Tampa General Hospital, which is, a community hospital located within Tampa, but with a cancer center nearby. So this is a good way for us to test sort of offsite referrals and whether that regional model is really effective or not. So we are mid-trial right now. We don't have a readout yet of early data, but we're hoping to wrap it up by the end of 2025. I just want to acknowledge our collaborators, MITRE and CodeX, obviously, and our two partners and our trial matching service support partners. And I'm happy to turn it back over to b.well or Humza to follow up.
Yeah. Before we pass the mic over to Humza and company, I did put a note into the chat. Folks who have questions are encouraged to put those questions into the meeting chat, and then I will, at my own discretion, pick my favorite questions, and I will lob them to our presenters at the end. So do please put your questions in the chat as you think of them, and then I will pick the ones I like most. And thank you, Sharon. Appreciate your commitment and the long view that you've brought to this. So thank you for all that context and for the work that you and your team have done. And now I'll pass the mic over to our b.well colleagues.
Yeah, thank you,
And
Brian. Thank you,
Humza.
Sharon. A lot of really awesome and exciting work from the ACS CAN. Like, I think that the value prop that you guys are pursuing is really compelling, and can drive a lot of value to patients. But for the next part of this segment, we're going to talk a little bit about b.well Connected Health, and just like our foray into the pharma and life sciences space, which is largely centered on clinical trials recruitment as well. But before we dive in, Humza Raees, I'm the Director of Strategic Partnerships here at b.well. Also along with me, I have Adam Culbertson, who's the Senior Director of Emerging Technologies, and then Laurel Salvati, who is our Director of Product Management. But before diving in, I kind of want to level set at our core, here at b.well, we're big data people, right? So we believe that all the success in healthcare starts with data, and that you treat data like your most valuable product, making sure it's always connected, compliant, and driving insights. And that's what we help our clients do. So as Sharon mentioned, data interoperability challenge has really impacted enrollment into clinical trials and research opportunities. Her example of 8 elements being captured and only 2 of them being usable is a really great demonstration of this. So we're new to the pharma and life sciences space, but all that being said, we feel that our technology at its core can really empower patients to find and identify new care options and really advocate on behalf of themselves. So b.well, for a little bit of context, we unify fragmented data and services into a single personalized digital experience that's largely powered by a comprehensive longitudinal record. So we simplify access to care, connect all that health data, and deliver relevant and engaging interactions across the entire care journey. So like the more the user engages with the platform, the more we learn about them, the better we can personalize the experience, drive better decisions, outcomes, and satisfactions. So as Sharon mentioned as well, one of the biggest blockers to enrollment to potentially life-saving treatment is the awareness, and deploying a similar blue button kind of concept where we can basically pipe in the full medical record or longitudinal health record of a patient can really help enable and improve this metric for enrollment. We also found that clinical staff today don't really have the time, and in order to drive real value, patients really need to be the ones that are empowered. The example that we like to use is the one of like the travel agent, right? Technology didn't make them more efficient, but it empowered all of us to go and advocate on ourselves and basically make our own travel decisions, which thereby eliminated a lot of the need for travel agents. It's just a fun little example. I guess a little bit more context on b.well. We built the first platform to deliver or to eliminate healthcare fragmentation, delivering those groundbreaking experiences. We have a number of plans, providers, retail pharmacies, et cetera, all connected into our platform with over 2.2 million provider connections, over 300 health plans. We've also digitized a lot of the care quality gaps, so we can do a variety of different things, but where we're focusing, so we also service Walgreens, Samsung, which are really large populations. All that being said, I'm going to pass it to Adam to talk a little bit about open standards.
Thanks, Humza, and also Sharon. What a great work you guys have done. And I guess Humza, are you driving the slides? I guess. So yeah, when I joined b.well this year, our CEO Kristen Valdez was basically told, we're all in on fire, we're all in an open standard. So it was for me a great fit. So my background, I worked with the SMART team at Boston Children's Hospital, where I'm still adjunct faculty, also at Georgetown and then Northwestern. I'm senior director of standards and emerging technology. So how did we get here and coalescing around fire? So, b.well, we're about patients accessing their health records freely and openly, and also open standards. So we believe open standards are the way to get there. And in terms of the regulatory environment, of course, we had the High Tech Act, which really spurred adoption of electronic health records. I'm not going to go into every single one of these things. Of course, more recently, there's a CMS aligned network, which b.well is working to support, and we've signed up for a couple of the use cases. Next slide. So as I mentioned, b.well is all about open standards. We're all in on fire. And so what's unique about b.well, right, is we're sort of person-centric data fabric, if you will. So we unlock whole person care with longitudinal health records, richest network of health data, normalized real-time in fire. So we believe that fire is the way to go. We believe it's the data exchange format, really not of the future, but really today. And so we're really working to align our tech stack along with the fire specification. So, anything from EHR, claims, networks, right? We'll take the data however we can get it, and then we normalize it into fire. Next slide. And once we have the data into fire, right, there's lots of things that we could do with the data in fire. So one current approach beyond just having a fire server. So we have open source fire server that we've pushed out that folks can take a look at. But we also have a fire plus CQL platform, right? And so what that does is allows us to identify gaps of care and do basically take things like digital quality measures and do queries against the data and say, is this patient missing this or this based upon a standard of care, right? And the same sort of approach could also be potentially applied to trial matching, right? As once you take a trial, we think about inclusion, exclusion, we could convert it to CQL. I wouldn't say we're 100% sold on CQL as the way of doing that. We're still exploring some different methods, but it is an existing capability we have, and so that's kind of a great starting point for us. Next slide. So, I talked about CQL and Fire, right? So Fire is not natively designed for analytics, right? So this creates a conundrum, a bit of a challenge, right? So what is the best way to get the data out? So Fire solves the standard format, but it's not necessarily designed for analytics. And so one approach is CQL. Other approaches are SQL. And of course, Fire bundle challenges, so converting the JSON serialized Fire into analytics-friendly table. Streaming real-time patient data requires robust frameworks. We got to have the pipes if you want to, your analytics is only good as the data coming in, right? So we're not in, we don't have a, sorry, I got distracted with the comment. So basically, yeah, so we're integrating Fire with diverse data models, connected Fire data seamlessly to advanced analytics. And then next slide. And so thinking about this and, prior to the presentation, basically one thing that we did is, right, I went back and kind of looked through some of the work. So Sharon and, have done some excellent work around feasibility of institutional clinical trial matching. There's some other really interesting approaches. So PRISM was a really highly cited paper. And then I was a fellow at the National Library of Medicine, and so I came across this wonderful paper on matching patients to clinical trials using large language models. And so all these approaches actually have shown some really interesting improvements in ability to actually extract meaning from the data. Next slide. And so when it comes to clinical trial matching, it all starts with a question, right? So defining research questions, right? And so clearly defined research question, what's the, that you want to solve. So what's your study want to do? So does intervention X improve primary outcome in patients with specific condition compared to control, right? The structure incorporates key elements of clinical trials, intervention, the outcome, the population, the comparison, right? So we start with a question, some of the great data science speakers, right, is the AI will improve things, but one of the great skills of the 21st century is asking good questions, right? Einstein said, if I had an hour to save the world, I'd spend 59 minutes figuring out how to ask the right question. So think of an example of this. So does aspirin improve cardiovascular event reduction in patients with hypertension compared to placebo, right? So we start with a question. Next slide. And then we have to develop the FIRE cohort, right? So you got to develop the study protocol. We have to develop inclusion, exclusion criteria, determine what FIRE resources are needed, and then identify methods to create cohort from data resources. And so when you think about the ability technically to do this, right, it's not just structured data, which we can get through FIRE, but also leveraging advanced NLP methods to make sure we get full coverage, right? And so these approaches, leveraging FIRE plus structured data. Of course, we're not addressing data quality now because that is another significant limiter. But these things will allow us to maximize the creation of cohorts. And particularly uniquely with b.well, right, is instead of going, the trial going after the patient, right, like we have the data sitting natively, and we can inform the patients of which studies they may be eligible for, right? So, and of course, we only share patients' data with a trial if patients choose to do that, right? We privacy is a big core value of ours, and so, but since we have the data and we're developing these advanced analytical methods, we have the ability to determine, hey, you're eligible for X or Y or Z. And so this is really, we believe, a way to sort of flip the process on its head and improve the number of patients that potentially could enroll in trials. So next slide. And so once you have the data, you have to map the data to FIRE resource. So this is from Vulkan, right? So how to an example, so let's say we start with a question and we convert it to a series of inclusion exclusion criteria, and then we go from that into a set of FIRE resources for the structured data. And frankly, the process isn't that much different from unstructured data, because once you run your NLP pipeline and you structure the data using ontologies, terminologies, it won't necessarily map to the FIRE resources, but you're also going to have the codes, which are also going to sit in these FIRE resources. So patient demographics map to patient, visits map to encounter, diagnosis to condition, laboratory test, observation, procedures, medications, right? Medication statement, or a medication request, medication dispense, and administration, right? So you got to know what FIRE resources the data actually exist in. So that's a key thing. And then next slide. And then, so through all that, just kind of going through the process of building cohorts from FIRE, right? We identify the analysis population, we develop inclusion, exclusion criteria, right? Factors such as age, sex, condition of interest. Then you build the cohorts with structured data, unstructured data, and yeah, and it's rich, and also with sophisticated NLP, we can build highly informative data that we can use to match patients. And I will now turn it over to my wonderful colleague, Laurel, to talk about how this looks in practice.
Okay, thanks so much, Adam. If you can go to the next slide. So that's all great. We're going to build our cohort, using our inclusion exclusion criteria. But what are some of the other problems that we have to solve? First, with the Patient Right of Access Pro APIs, there's a need to connect to all of the different providers. And if you think about an oncology patient, they've got multiple providers that they're seeing, primary care providers that have some information on family history, screenings, diagnoses, social determinants of health, their main oncologist who gave the diagnosis and the treatment plan, and the cancer stage and cancer type. We also need some of that biomarker data. And then the surgical oncologist, if applicable, and then also medical oncologist, also if applicable, for all the chemotherapy and supportive care medication information. So there's not only the different types of providers that we need that patient to think about connecting their records to. And so in our platform, they can connect to different EMR systems. So there might be an oncologist, let's say, at the Piedmont system, but your PCP is at Emory. And so we need to make sure we help the patient connect to get that full picture of their medical record. So not only the types of providers, but the different systems that they may be seeing. And in the Atlanta metro area, you could have multiple different systems, as we saw. You might have a specialist in a different EMR system. So that's one of the problems we need to solve, is to get all the data into one place. And so on the next slide, you'll see some of the nudges that we do and kind of the workflow that we do to help the patients connect all of their records. So they can search for their records at different provider offices. We can have them verify their identity with Clear and then go and look for different sources within the network and either show them that they're already connected or they might need logins required to pull that information from their different EMR systems. We also can suggest providers that they may have seen from different claims if we get a claims feed from the insurance plan or other entity. And so that kind of helps to prompt. Because if you think about it, over the last 10 years, did you remember all the providers that you've seen that you want to pull data in for their medical records? So what we are doing is trying to help the patient pull all that information in so we get a full picture of their medical history. And then on the next slide, you can see that we are taking the model that Sharon presented and kind of flipping it so that we are presenting the clinical trial matches to the patient. So you can imagine using those same 8 variables that were defined in the paper earlier by ACS-CAN and MITRE project. And we do the same thing. We take those 8 variables and query the patient population. And we say, you know what, you might be eligible for a study. You have a match. And these are the data elements that we found that match you to that study. But we say we still need to confirm your eligibility. And frankly, we wouldn't do 100% confirmation within our system, but we can give them trial matches and they can export that information and take it to their provider. As you can see, managing patient consent is a big piece of what we do as well. We have multiple different consents within our application. This would be to consent to participate in more of a study or the research area as well. But it's very clear what the patient is doing when they're sharing their information. And then also doing kind of a confirmation of the data that we've pulled in. So not only did we found that some data element either from unstructured or structured data, but we can have the patient verify that. And then the next step is really to refer them either to the clinical trial site or to a research organization that can go take it from there and confirm that they are eligible for the trial. And so that's how we're flipping the model from being provider focused to being patient focused. All right, and that's the last slide that I have. So Humza, if you wanted to wrap it up on anything, I think I see some interesting questions in the chat as well.
Yeah, Adam, do you want to speak to why you're not sold on CQL? There's a question from Amy.
Yeah, so I wouldn't say the issue isn't sold. I would just say we're exploring various approaches, right? So CQL is one approach. SQL is another approach. Any analytic method is going to have pros and cons. And so for any given use case, you have to balance the pros and the cons for the outcome you want, right? So any model is going to have biases towards different questions that you ask. So I think I wouldn't say I wouldn't frame it as not sold on CQL. We're certainly very supportive of the spec and the standard, but different problems require different tools.
Perfect. Thank you, Adam. Sharon, there's another question in the chat here from Matt Rice. Matt asks, how did you pick which institutes to work with? That's question number 1. And question 2, how did you work through getting the Blue Button tool integrated in their system?
Yeah, I was sort of laughing at this question. The word Sisyphean comes to mind. There's sort of 2 levels here. One is, can we figure out how to match patients to clinical trials? And the other one is, can we figure out how to test an application to match patients to clinical trials? And honestly, the where Laurel ended up with flipping this to putting something in the hands of patients is possibly easier. Not easier, but it gets around the whole IT hospital infrastructure problem, which was a real hurdle for us. So kind of starting with the second question, getting it integrated into their system actually delayed our trial tremendously. It turned out to be a real uphill battle for us. We in fact lost a site where we had signed contracts and we were all set to engage with them. And some IT person somewhere down the line just said, nope. And it was over. That was it. He just said, nothing's touching nothing's touching our EHR in any way, shape, or form. And so it was definitely tricky. I think, one strategy that I think b.well is doing, and other organizations as well, is to work within these existing systems that the health systems already use. So partnering, with Cerner, or with some of these these providers IT providers that the hospital is familiar with, to work within that, or else go directly to the patients, I think is a way to get around that. So that was a little bit tricky, getting it integrated. It's not really integrated, right? It sits in there and doesn't integrate, right? It pulls that data from the EHR on demand, very limited data, but then it doesn't write to the EHR. There's no chance of that, but even that wasn't enough to reassure some folks as well. The other question about how to pick the institutes, we actually had some grant money, and so this is a grant that we provide. We put out an RFP for institutions wanting to test this method, and got a ton of interest. Places are super excited about finding better ways to match their patients to trials. But there were just, again, so many hurdles. We wrote the app to work with Epic, because that was, sort of the easiest target for us right then. And just because it was a proof of concept trial and not an app that we were trying to develop, we just stuck with Epic. And so a number of the institutions that really wanted to engage weren't using Epic, or institutions were super excited about it, but their IT staff said, yeah, that sounds great. We have a 3-year backlog of improvements that we're implementing in our system, but we'll put you on the list, and so, we just weren't able to follow up with some of those. So that's sort of how we ended up with the 2 that we had. They proposed that they wanted to do this with us, and we were able to make it work with them. And so that's where we ended up.
Thank you very much, Sharon. And thanks, folks, for your questions. I have a question. When Adam, when you were presenting, I heard a lot about pulling data from electronic health records and building a cohort. And then when I heard Laurel speaking, I heard about a patient collecting his or her data in a centralized place and then looking for studies. It feels like, for me as a outsider, that you're approaching it from 2 different directions. Is it, how does what you're talking about building cohorts, Adam, align to what Laurel was sharing about patient-mediated approaches, where you've got a single patient and you're looking for unless you're talking about cohorts of studies, how do those 2 fit together?
So, really just 2 different sides of the same coin, right? So like at b.well, right, your data comes into the FHIR server, it gets normalized to FHIR. Then, we can run analytics on the data to match patients to different clinical trials. And then Laurel's really looking at the patient experience side. Like, once you've been identified to match to X trial, then the patient has the opportunity to say, oh, yes, I want more information, put me in contact, right? Like, the traditional clinical trial process, right, has a lot of, historically, a lot of trial and error, right? So like, if you take the current approach where somebody say, I match for this study, and a patient, responds to an ad on social media, right? Then they would talk to the researchers, and then the researchers would go through their process, and they're like, oh yeah, you're a good fit for this, or no, you're not a good fit for this, right? So what we can do by this approach is, fundamentally, flip the script, if you will, and start with the clinical data, and also empower patients to make informed decisions. So I don't know if Laurel wants to comment, but that's sort of that would be, kind of how I view it.
Right, exactly. And we do, under the hood, have the infrastructure to build the cohorts and do the matching of the patients. And then we're presenting those recommendations to the patient. And it could be 1 or multiple recommendations that the patient would match to for the clinical trial. But yes, we want to put that in the hands of the patient and be a little bit more proactive versus them having to go and kind of search online. The other thing that we've also heard is that the data is, since it's validated from an EMR, it's a kind of clinically validated data element versus a strictly patient-reported data element. And sometimes, patient-reported data, may not be 100% correct, especially when you get to some of the complicated biomarkers and oncology treatments that patients are on. And so this is validated from their EMR data. And so it kind of also speeds up that time to validating the inclusion and exclusion criteria.
I'll just remind the audience that there's room for questions. I have another one for the b.well team, and that is, in the absence of additional grants to fund new work, what's the business model? Who would pay? It's a question I always ask when we're looking at an innovation in the healthcare space, is that who's going to pay for it? So clearly it's good for the human race if a patient can collect his or her data through a platform and then find out which trials he or she is available or has available to them. Who pays for such a thing? Is this who's incentivized? Are the clinical research organizations paying for validated leads, or would a patient pony up $20 to do a scan of the marketplace and find out whether there's a life-saving therapy available for them?
Yeah, so I'll take this one. I think there's a variety of different ways that we can kind of attack this problem, right? First is like we can work with like pharmaceutical companies, right? Like we have a lot of late stage conversations with like actual pharma manufacturers that are interested in like, commercial use cases that are like, affecting, certain outcomes or populations to take actions, right? That could be anything from like driving towards treatment or, driving towards like an appointment or something like that, right? Like a test, for example, so that they can get diagnosed and then, drive onto an actual medication. Then there's also like CRO type organizations, right? Or like the sites themselves, that have had issues, recruiting and like doing a lot, like, so we can eliminate a lot of like the interviews, the like questionnaires, a lot of that kind of stuff that, sites have to currently populate and fill out. And then, we can actually empower payers, providers, those folks that have like user bases to, one, provide folks with options around new clinical trials, research opportunities, and then also they can conduct like decentralized clinical trials as well. Like for example, like a Mayo Clinic, for example, right? They are in the Midwest. Their population is primarily, like one demographic. We can help kind of diversify that and help them with like, more different kinds of folks in their clinical trials. We also partner with a company called RTI, which is a Research Triangle Institute. They're like a research organization. They can also, they're helping us innovate in the space. Like we mentioned, right? We're new to the space. We're trying to figure out what our niche and our fit is. But the platform is super extensible, right? And it can be extended to a number and a variety of use cases. Anything you'd add, Adam, Laurel?
Yeah, I would add that with the RTI partnership, as you can imagine, we're extending past clinical trials into observational research as well. So not everything has to be about, an intervention. A patient may want to participate in collecting different patient-reported outcomes on their quality of life. So there's kind of, other opportunities for the patient that doesn't always involve, a medical intervention.
All right, thank you.
Oh, yeah, and I just wanted to kind of extend on some of those comments too. It's, we obviously we have some great partnerships, some like RTI, which have been mentioned, but going back to the CKO question, right? Like we're still, we haven't, we're still open to discussions. We're open to partnerships and collaborations beyond just, direct, business opportunities that, we think, there could be some, research partnerships that we could potentially explore.
We have time for one last question, and Matt has been kind enough to share it with us. And so, question about LLMs. With the rise of LLM adoption in healthcare, how do both the Blue Button program and the b.well plan around data generated by LLMs and EHRs that may be inaccurate to the actual patient's clinical state? Ooh, fun one. LLM hallucinating patients. All right.
So, yeah, that's a great question. So I, previously spent some time at HHS and ONC working as the innovator in residence on patient data matching. Right. And so basically my project was the ONC Patient Matching Challenge, which sought to bring more clarity and, how good, to some degree, like how good matching algorithms are. Right. And so just because you match to a particular trial does not mean you're going to be included in that trial. Right. Like it just says, do you want to connect, with this particular clinical trial, right? It doesn't, there's no, the LLM found a match and says match the criteria for this particular study, right? That doesn't mean you're going to be entered in that study. Like it's simply, right? You can think of the pipeline, right? b.well has the Fire server, the data comes in, lands in the Fire server. We do, the fancy analytics on the back end using LLMs, using natural language processing, leveraging Fire, right? And then that brings, we're building bridges between the patients and then the clinical trials or the clinical studies themselves, right? It's not a, this is the absolute source of truth. It's merely making connections. So.
Right. So I guess the answer to Matt's question is the impact for a hallucinatory error is low here in the space of clinical trial matching, because it'll just result in a later disqualification. Is that
yeah, I mean, I just want to add we're working a little bit, we're starting to look at policy around AI and things like that as well. And I mean, I think this is just a beautiful example of the importance of keeping the human in the loop, right? That this our idea with Blue Button wasn't so much to do the perfect match for patients. It was to facilitate the provider work, right? And I think the same thing b.well's doing, they're putting this information in the hands of the patients, or putting, and like you just said, b.well, it goes from the patient to the clinical trial coordinator then. And so the humans then need to go in and, do that final step. I don't think there's any way that we should or possibly could get to a point where we can simply rely on this automated matching. But I mean, that's definitely the direction we're going, right? And these tools, these advanced tools are going to be, radically change the process and facilitate all of this. But hopefully we will never get away from the fact that we're still going to need that human eye on it at some point.
Well, thank you, Sharon. Thank you to the b.well team for your helpful answers, and and to the audience for your great questions. As we wrap things up, I'd just like to remind you that there's a number of upcoming CodeX events, including those open discovery calls that we described earlier, and they're all linked here on the CodeX calendar, which I've just put in the chat. So thank you again for coming. We look forward to seeing you again at our next October Community of Practice. And this event is being recorded and will be published to the CodeX website, so that you can refer to it if you'd like, or you can share it with your friends and colleagues. So thanks to all of our presenters. Thanks to our wonderful guests, and we wish you all an excellent Friday afternoon. And if you're having a long weekend where you are, then I hope you have a great long weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you.